So welcome to the 6th Community Forum and Discussion that Partners for Reintegration has held in Missoula to help our community talk about some of the issues that affect people returning from incarceration or secure facilities as they try to reintegrate with Missoula community. Partners for Reintegration is a community coalition. We've been around about 3 years. We run on volunteer energy and firepower, so if you're interested and want to know more, we have an email list. If you're not on it, we'd love to have you on the list so we can tell you about future events and any needs we might have. We're always looking for volunteers. This is a panel on the impact on families of incarceration that we set out as a priority over a year ago, so it takes us a little time to get things organized, but we're really glad to be able to do it. You'll notice that Missoula Community Access Television will be taping this. It will be broadcast in a month and then put on the video on demand on air, or on the internet, so that you can access it. They've been posting most of our sessions, and so it gives you a chance to look back or let other people know about it. And they say, well, gee, what's the problem with families who have somebody in prison? You can say, there's a really great hour-long program that will explain it all to you. I want to point out that one of the things we're proudest of is the leadership opportunities for returning citizens that Partners for Reintegration has created. We're the only local reentry coalition that has really featured people who are experts on the justice system in leadership positions. And I'm just really pleased to announce that tomorrow the SB 62, the peer support certification bill, will be signed by the governor. Two of our leaders, Loraine and Robert Howe, gave testimony before Sentencing Commission in the House and Senate, and they were very instrumental in educating our legislators about why that's such an important bill. The other one, SB 65 on housing, has passed both chambers and will be signed by the governor within a month. So we've had two successful pieces of legislation pass, and I think the Missoula Coalition and all of you have had a big part in making that happen. So as I said, we set forth the impact on families of incarceration as a priority over a year ago, and I really want to thank Janelle Corn for actually organizing this panel and making it happen. And Janelle's going to introduce the panel members.
Thank you, Janet. I'm Janelle Corn, and I'm actually don't get all the credit for this. Janet did a huge amount of work to get this forum together as well. Before I introduce the panel, I'd like to tell you about one of the things that we're doing for family support. We have a weekly free facilitated meeting of families of people involved in the justice system. And I have flyers that tell you about that. If you or anyone you know might be interested in this, please take a flyer. You can get one from me after the program. There is child care available through the Parenting Place, and I've got one of their flyers as well. So you can, just a few blocks from where we meet, find child care as well. I'll now introduce our members. Each of these experts will speak for about 5 minutes. We won't take questions when they're finished, but rather when they're all done, we'll have a discussion period of about 30 minutes. So please hold your questions. Our speakers are from your left to right are Vickie Beebee, community member, Loraine Bond, program director at the Parenting Place, Marc Kittelson, probation and parole officer with our Department of Corrections, and Shari Rigg from Stepping Stones Counseling, licensed addiction counselor. We'll begin with Vickie, if you'd like to speak, and when I stand up, that means that your 5 minutes are up. So I'll be seated otherwise. Welcome, Vickie Beebee.
Is this working?
Good.
My son is incarcerated. In the beginning, anger and grief took control of my life. I was easily confused as I tried to understand the new language and rules of the charges, as well as jails and prison. Set time and day of visitations did not always allow me to visit, as I worked full-time. In the year before sentencing, he was moved many times. Not knowing where he was, I waited for his collect calls that I could not accept, but would prompt me to charge minutes, plus pay a fee for their service. Because they moved him regularly, I found it costly to sign up for phone services. And at one time I had 3 different charges, and it takes 4 to 6 weeks to get refunded for unused minutes minus the service fee. A lawyer named Brianna Kotke helped me feel I was not alone, but lawyer fees are costly, so I talked to her only once. I did learn she accepts trades for time. And her advice to me was to get letters written to the judge. Friends and family responded. Those letters were most valuable, as she later stated to me. A judge needs to see all sides of a person's life to help with judgment. Mandatory minimums for drug charges is very harsh, and my son needed support from family and friends. Asking for these letters to the judge and explaining the situation was easier to write than speak. Family lives many states away, and it took months to reach out to everyone. It turns out I feel it was the most important effort I made to help my son. Before addiction, we lived a very adventurous life. It is those memories that define my son for me. Addiction is the disease that took him away. I found support to understand that from a group formed by Shari, Rigg, and Janelle Korn. Once a weeknight, I found my voice, and emotions were received without judgment. The questions I had were sometimes answered, and for the first time, I didn't feel alone. I was angry and afraid. My son was more angry and afraid. He wanted to blame himself, and I wanted to blame myself for not being able to keep this from happening. Blame and anger grew into great depression. Fear of the unknown. Where would he go? How long? How would he spend his time? Will he get rehabilitation? What work will he be assigned? He's had asthma from birth, and will he have an asthma attack in the middle of the night and no one will help him in time? I'm 67 years old, and my biggest fear is not living to see him free on the outside. Without my help, who will put a roof over his head? Will he find work as a felon? If he continues to do well, then I will also. The biggest challenge is knowing how to help my changed son once he is free on the outside. The disease of drug addiction will always be there, just like it is with other addictions. Will he be able to fight his addiction when the outside world may not be so accepting of felons? It takes a village to raise a child is a phrase we've all heard. I changed that phrase now. It takes a village to understand that once a felon is not always a felon. I am not defined by my mistakes in life, and in my knowing my son, he is not his mistakes either. A nonviolent criminal act hurt my son for many years. He will pay the price in time served, and I also will pay the price with him, as all families do when a loved one is incarcerated. My goal is to move close to my son, find a studio apartment and work. I will visit him regularly because I am not going to miss seeing my son as I grow older. Addiction is the disease he will fight, and together we will survive. A book titled We're All Doing Time is a good book to read to start healing the pain. I can hold my head up now. I'm not ashamed of disease. I will instead look for the cure with a community that understands harsh judgment has never cured anyone.
Next, we'd like to ask Loraine to speak from the perspective of the work the parenting place does. Loraine?
Well, that's hard to follow.
It was hard to say.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing that. So I work at the parenting place, and we actually provide parenting classes at both the pre-release and now at the Missoula County Detention Facility. In 2016, and I'm not going to bore you with numbers, I just want you to have an idea of what they are. In 2016, we worked with 71 parents at the pre-release and 136 parents in the jail facility. Those are the parents representing over 500 kids. Okay, and I think it's really important to understand those numbers when we talk about this, because when we're talking about parents that are incarcerated, we're talking about the effect of that incarceration on generations to come. You know, when we talk about, you know, cycles of people going to prison, we talk about the pipeline to prison. The thing that stops that is people understanding how to parent, because parenting is probably the strongest force we have. You know, I've been in this room before and I've talked about adverse childhood experiences, and that's usually my go-to, and I'm not going to talk about that today. What I want to talk about is the people that we work with. You know, the adults that we work with that were children at one point, and most of them have had really sad lives. You know, they talk about their experiences as a child when we're talking about parenting. Unfortunately, like her son, in a high 90-something% of them, their crimes are drug related. You know, maybe it's burglary, but it's so they could get money to buy their drugs. Just about everything focuses on that. So I don't do addiction counseling. Okay, so, but we have to talk about addiction in parenting, because one of the things that we have to talk about, particularly in the jail, is how do you parent if you're using? You know, what do the authorities look at when they walk into a household and find a parent that's using, that has small children? So we talk about safety. We talk about how to find supports. We talk about what violence in the household looks like, because when you're using, your inhibitions are broken down. And so things that people say, I never would have done that if I had been sober, I have to say, whoa, back up. You know, if it's not in you, you wouldn't have done that. But if it's in you, your drug of choice isn't doing you any favors, and it's not doing your kids any favors. You know, one of the things that I use in the parenting class is a Swedish proverb, and it says, love me when I deserve it the least, because that's when I need it the most. And I talk to people about their children and their children's behavior, because when the kids are acting up, what they're trying to say is something's wrong with me and I need you right now. Well, you know what? When our adults are acting up, when our adults are using drugs, what they're trying to say is there's something really wrong in my world and I need you right now. And what they don't need is us to be really harsh with them, just like their children don't need their parents to be really harsh with them. You know, I want you to understand a couple of the people. I was in the jail the other day and we were talking about corporal punishment, because that's something we talk about a lot in parenting, because we're trying to convince people to be harsh. I mean, to not be harsh. But what they will say is, I think I probably needed to be beat more when I was a kid, because then maybe I wouldn't be making the choices that I'm making. So our view on that, and this is what I told this father the other day, is that actually when a parent is harsh with their children for consequences, what that does is it causes the parent to be responsible for the child's behavior. And the child isn't responsible for their behavior because the parent has to do it all. So what the child does is they become devious. And they start to think that if I don't get punished, what I'm doing is okay. And if I don't get caught, then everything is okay. The other day I had to point out that that's the beginning of criminal thinking. You know, and so if you want to teach your children to do something else, that might be one of the first things that we need to get rid of. So she's standing up, and so this is the end. You know, the one thing I told that father was that he's going back and he's going to live with his 14-year-old daughter, and she yells at him a lot. So I said, so how are you going to respond? He said, I don't know, she gets me going. I said, then whisper. Because if you want her attention, you have to whisper. And he just went, what? I said, don't engage. You know, so we talked a lot about it, and he said, well, I have to teach her. I said, well, here's what she's going to say to you, and this is what we say to a lot of our parents, is that when you start telling your kids that they need to make better choices, they are going to ask you, what about your choices? So think about what answer you're going to give them. And in our parenting classes, that's what we help prepare them for.
Thank you.
It's not going to go any farther.
Do you want to change?
Do you want to
places?
change?
There's a microphone
Yeah.
for you
Okay.
too.
Oh,
You pick
okay.
it up.
Can you guys hear okay? You guys hear that? Okay. So I'm Marc Kittelson. I'm with Probation and Parole. Missoula Probation and Parole, just in the county, supervises well over 1,000 people for felonies. That's just felony supervision alone. So it kind of gives you an idea of how involved we are in the community. And so I have kind of a written out speech, and I think the main theme just coming in before I started is just communication. If there's one thing I want to discuss, it's communication. So healthy families represent one of the most important resources for reentering citizens. They can provide housing, income, emotional support, transportation, and accountability, and these are all major things for anyone in life, but especially for somebody who's been incarcerated and is reentering the community. Family support is oftentimes the most significant external factor in maintaining motivation for someone who's incarcerated or is in treatment with the department, and can be the primary external factor for early success for a member re-entering the community, for those resources that I mentioned earlier. So as a probation and parole officer, I understand many of these difficulties people are facing re-entering the society. I also understand that this weight is not only felt by the inmate, returning citizen, whatever you want to call them, it's also felt by the family member or close peer. The difficulties faced often do not end when someone returns home, and they frequently face new challenges. This can be the result of consequences from the offense, such as increased conditions of judgment, restrictions, financial burdens that are often imposed, increased stigma from the community, causing new barriers such as employment, housing, medical issues that could come up, and loss of support just from peers and other members of the community. This can often seem daunting, overwhelming, and unfair. And this obviously is, the more severe the offense is, typically the more burdens, more barriers they're going to face coming out. So as a community, which includes the offender, the inmate, the returning citizen, this includes also the family, other private citizens, the probation and parole office, and other providers, it is important to recognize we're all stakeholders in this. Because of this, I would suggest opening up lines of communication wherever possible. Simple communication between the family and our community and a provider or an officer such as myself can significantly improve the chances of success in an individual case. This allows information to go both ways in an effective way to clear up uncertainty, provide feedback. This feedback goes both ways. It could be feedback, for instance, with myself, providing it to a community member, a family member, the person I am supervising, a different provider, or go the other way around where I'm getting feedback on what's going on or suggestions regarding supervision. This helps me, on my end, this helps me develop a case plan and a better way to work with somebody, in particular, work with the community. Also with the department itself, it helps provide more insight for the family member and peer support. So finally, reintegration and incarceration and reentry can be very difficult for anyone involved in the criminal justice system. Barriers can always arise and setbacks will always occur. However, Missoula is incredibly rich in resources, a lot more than about any other city in Montana, allowing people to better address their needs, whether they're on probation, they're returning citizens, family members, or community members concerned or affected by crime. Identifying which is most valuable oftentimes takes a collective effort.
Our final speaker is Shari Rigg.
Thank you, Janelle, and thank you, Vickie, for sharing your story. I know that was not an easy thing to do, so I appreciate that. And I think you spoke for many, many family members. I want to address families from two different perspectives because they are related but different. One is to address families who are coping with the current incarceration of a loved one, and then families who are coping with the return of that loved one back into the family. The first part is very difficult, and I think Vickie spoke very well about what it's like to have a loved one who is incarcerated. The fear, the anxiety, the unknowing of what's going to happen, the being kept in the dark about things, very unsettling. And then the cost that she talked about is tremendous and can be tremendous. And when that cost is overwhelming, the consequence is that you are totally cut off from any communication with your loved one, and that in and of itself is very disheartening and frightening. So how do families cope with that? Oftentimes, they don't. Well, being angry, trying to hold it in, having conflicting feelings about I should be thinking about my son, or I should be thinking about my husband or my daughter or my grandchild. And so families oftentimes don't address their own needs. And it's very important to your loved one who's incarcerated that you remain emotionally healthy. And that's often a very difficult thing to do. So I really, it's one of the reasons why I wanted to work with Janelle and get this support group going, because I think it's very important for families to have a place where they can come and address their own emotional needs without condemnation or judgment, and to be heard. It's not always just about the person who is incarcerated, and that's often where the focus is. And then, as Loraine was discussing, there's the children, and children have their own needs that need to be met, and sometimes the parent who is left being a single parent has a hard time trying to cope with, number one, being left to do all of the work of raising the children and running the household and perhaps working to try and make ends meet. All of those things can be hard. And so hopefully more families will take advantage of this opportunity to just come and share with other people who are experiencing the same thing. I think it would be helpful. The other thing is when a loved one is returning home. So everyone who has had a loved one who has been incarcerated has been through that first experience of being the abandoned family member and having to take care of things without any help. When that person comes home, oftentimes there are expectations that may or may not be realistic expectations. And so having an opportunity to discuss that and what is that going to look like when my loved one comes home? How do I react to them? I mean, we have to remember that the person who's been incarcerated has been living in a foreign environment. It's like they are in a foreign country. There are very different rules. It's a very different culture. And those things change a person. So when they come home, they're not going to be the same person that left. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be worse or better, but they'll be different. And being able to recognize and respect those differences is vital to that person being able to reintegrate back into the family and into the community. So respect is really important. And I'm not talking about the traditional sense of respect, although that's important. Here she's standing up. Can I have Marc's couple of minutes that he didn't take?
It felt like 5 minutes to me.
Respect and understanding are the two things that people returning from incarceration say that they want from their family members. And the respect is kind of respect me for the experiences that I've been through, for what I've learned from my period of incarceration, and also respect my right to make mistakes now that I'm home. I'm not going to be perfect. People who are incarcerated have been to tons of classes and they've learned a lot of things, but they haven't had the ability to take the skills that they've learned and put them into daily life practices. And that's one of the things that we can do when we work with people when they come to us as addiction counselors and get aftercare or continuing care for their substance use. Like Loraine was saying, it's like 90%, I think 85 to 90% of people who are incarcerated have a substance use issue or a gambling issue or something. So being able to address that, and then also to have some understanding that things may be difficult. They're going to feel frustrated that they can't find a job. They're going to feel frustrated that maybe the house that the family has rented for 5 years, now the landlord is saying you can no longer live here. You and your family are going to have to leave, or you can't be together. So I could go on and on. Thank you so much for your attention.
Let's have a round of applause for all four of them. Now we can open the floor to questions. You can address questions to individual members of the forum or address a broad, more general question. Do we want to use a...
We don't need to for fun.
Okay, so we aren't going to need a microphone, so...
Just speak up.
I'm here representing NAMI, which is the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill. And as I'm sure most of you know, a lot of the people who are incarcerated have a mental illness. And So I want to thank you so much for what you're doing. And I wish that this support group had been around when my daughter was in jail. So I'm really pleased to hear that this is available, and let you know that NAMI also has support groups for families.
Thank you.
You know what I find, and I'm going to take that as a question, because what I find with a lot of the people that I work with, because I do talk about the adverse childhood experiences, and that can have a real impact on future addiction issues, because it does change your brain, the trauma that you go through as a child. And we know that lots of times kids' first drugs that they use, they find at home. You know, and so they're going to the medicine cabinet to try to treat what's wrong with them because they don't know what's going on. And what they don't understand is that their brain has changed as they're growing up. And so their body can't quite do what it was naturally meant to do to meet their needs. So maybe what I'm talking about is maybe they're depressed and their body is no longer capable of producing the chemicals that it would naturally produce to balance out that depression. And so they call it self-medicate, the people that I work with. Yeah, you know, I went looking for something. Or the guy that went off of Adderall and he said meth worked really well for, you know, and I'm thinking, oh no. So I see the same thing that you're talking about. There's a lot of mental health issues and they are treating it themselves. You know, and so the best thing that I can do as a parenting instructor is to say, okay, so you need to talk to your kids that when they hit that age that you were when you first started using, what you need to do is say, come to me and we'll get you some help instead of you trying to help yourself. So thank you for speaking up about that.
I can follow up just a little bit with that as well, and just saying that obviously, you know, a good percentage of people are co-occurring or have mental health issues, and that's an important thing I think that our department's trying to work more towards is recognizing that domain, mental health specifically. Also, that's kind of where, as an officer, that's where communication kind of comes in to piggyback on what my theme was on that, is, you know, having greater success with people who are engaged with mental health services, because, you know, a lot of times, like she mentioned, the drug use is secondary. It's coming secondary to the mental health, which, you know, can lead towards the criminality as well on top of that. So addressing that early on is extremely important. And I think as time, and I really hope personally, as time goes on, mental health will get the recognition it needs, because of how significant of an issue it is.
I'd like to follow up on that too, because sometimes we don't know what came first, the mental illness or the addiction. And sometimes it's hard to determine if it's a substance-induced mental illness or if it was mental illness that the person has been treating with substances. And that's hard to distinguish. The bottom line is that the behaviors need to be addressed and the underlying conditions need to be addressed. And there is treatment and there's hope for people to get well and live successfully in the community. And I think we are extremely fortunate in this day and age that we know enough that we can truly provide people with an opportunity to live successfully with their mental illness, with recovery from substances.
We're here representing Marc from Montana, where they have with young and teen parents usually. And we're wondering what sort of resources are available to children of the incarcerated single parents or for Advocacy and foster placements, and what supports are available for children of parents who are incarcerated and not placed with family.
That's a tough one. Because
Could you just repeat the question?
so she's asking what kind of services are available for the children, is that right? who have parents that are incarcerated. You know, I worked at Big Brothers Big Sisters for just about 10 years, and for many of those years, my focus was finding mentors for children who had a parent that was incarcerated. And even that was tough, because they're tough kids. You know, there's a lot going on in their lives, and the volunteers that we got, gotta love them, but some of them just didn't have the skills, and you couldn't give them the skills that they really needed. You know, there is an organization, I don't know if they're active in Missoula anymore, and they had the Angel Tree. Do you know if they still do that here through the churches?
Yeah, Sunday at Christmas.
And we tried to get families involved with them. That was more of a faith-based organization, and that worked for some families, but the important thing is, and this is something you have to think about, is that the parent that's incarcerated has to be involved in those kids, with those kids' lives, and that also is not always the circumstance, because sometimes parents are removed for the safety of the children. So there's so many variables that go into it that you know, you don't know what to do sometimes. What I would say, one of the best things for the parents of those kids is call the parenting place. Because, well, we actually offer a free respite service, and it's from 4 to 7, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, and parents just enroll with us, and then we watch their kids for free. And sometimes parents and kids need a break from each other. Parents need to re-energize, and so do kids. So we just do free play and feed them healthy food. And they get to interact with an adult that has some skills. So sometimes that's the best thing that we can offer.
I want to call your attention before I call on Landy to the back side of this wonderful little sheet. You'll see the Children's Bill of Rights for a parent who's incarcerated, and some of the Montana and DOC-based resources for families and children. DOC's really made, I think, a big effort to make sure that they're more family friendly, even though that's not part of their, I guess, charge. And so there's a kind of a growing awareness of what Lorraine's talking about and what you are about children. And we have another question here.
So I'm wondering if maybe Marc can answer this question, or at least address a little bit of it. Vickie, you had talked about early on in the system how you interacted with an attorney who encouraged you to write to the judge. And I think one of the things about incarceration is that it's incredibly scary, because the system has removed somebody from your family. And then as that process, as you go through that process, it becomes even more daunting, because understanding the process in and of itself is a whole another subject matter. And I think we talked a little bit about how families don't have that support, because then it becomes about the individual, or it becomes about the victim, and the families get pushed to the side, and including the children. And when somebody's put in incarceration, it's very difficult to communicate with that individual. And then when that person comes out of incarceration, and that's what we're talking about, family support and reintegration, who do you get to talk to? Because if you talk back to the probation or parole officer, they're kind of scary. Because they wear guns, and they have the ability to arrest somebody and to take them back to incarceration. And so there again is this incredible barrier of the communication. And I guess I would like to hear from Marc, what would you say about a family's ability to be a part of that person's reintegration, and their ability to communicate with you? I mean, you're the parole officer, the probation officer, and you're kind of like that key person.
Yes.
So.
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, obviously I understand that being the probation officer, the parole officer, it can be very intimidating. I encourage people to contact me, if they know they got a respective officer on that. Ultimately, I think every officer that I've met, it's their best. They're trying to work with the families. They really are. It might be intimidating, but ultimately, I think, like you said, like Landy said, that we kind of are that center point. We're the one that are coordinating all of this, and it's really important for us to hear from you guys. Also, if you know, setting up things, one thing that I found, a lot of people who have a lot of success coming out is the family members trying to set things up maybe ahead of time if they're coming straight from prison and they don't have the resources to be able to set things up on their own, having the person set up things that maybe they need, or maybe calling myself, I mean a different officer, not only that, but maybe talking with, just making cold calls. I mean, just calling places like the job service and asking for resources, you know, saying my daughter, my son, my brother's coming out, you know, they can talk about their skills, if it's job related, or perhaps calling service providers in town, whether it's just looking them up, calling somebody like Western Montana Mental Health, so calling them like Shari, and just kind of trying to get connections built that way. I mean, a lot of times I have to do that a lot with my job, where sometimes I don't have the answer to the question, and what I have to do is just start calling. And it's scary on my end too, having to call and fearing that I'm gonna ask a stupid question, but most of the time it works out. Most of the time I'm able to get the answer I need, whether it's for somebody else or for myself. Does that answer your question at all?
Okay, one more thing on the call. If a family member knows that somebody is struggling or not doing well, can you help them, or are you only going to arrest them if they're violating?
No, definitely not going to arrest them. And that's an important thing, I guess, maybe I didn't touch on, was that's the one thing we like to hear, not from the, oh, we're going to remove them from the community point of view, but just understanding, having that real dialogue. Because I think also one thing that, you know, anyone should understand is people are going to struggle, regardless if they're on supervision or not. So if they are struggling, it's important to hear that early on, and, you know, maybe just having that real conversation. Maybe it hasn't gotten to the point where they're violating the conditions of the parole, or even if they are, you know, even if they are doing that, just having a real conversation with the people and seeing where they're at with everything, and then trying to connect them with the resources, because that's ultimately what we do most of the time as officers, is connecting people with resources, or make sure they're maintaining those resources.
Can I add something to that? Because we only work with the people that have children, but if someone lives in Missoula and they're in the pre-release, their partner, spouse, can come and take parenting classes from us for free. And sometimes that's the conversation that gets the two of them on the same page, is how are we going to parent together once we're there. And then we do provide ongoing support, so sometimes that just gives a little bit extra underneath, because the whole family will struggle as someone gets out. And then the other thing I would say is that I have a guy who's getting out of pre-release and he's going to Kalispell, and they don't quite have the services that we have here for helping find a place to live. And he and his partner and their baby were looking for a place in Kalispell, and I write letters at the end of my parenting classes. I mean, I write that I write about what they learned and their capacity for understanding, and the journey that I see them take in the 3 months that I work with them. And I had a guy come in on Monday night and say, your letter made the difference. They waived the felony, no felony requirement based on the letter you wrote for me. So he came to say that. So all those letters that you can get from anyone, anybody that you're working with or that you know, if there is somebody that has worked with that person, those letters mean a lot. Not just from the family members, but from any professional that has worked with them. I highly encourage you to do that. And same with anybody that you work with. Just start collecting all that stuff.
I just want to address one thing too, and that is, if you have a family member and you know they're struggling, encourage them to go to their PO and be honest, because POs have much more training now in what the difficulties are for reentering. And I always encourage people to go and be upfront, explain to their PO what happened, what they're struggling with.
She has a question.
I have a question about grandparents' rights when one of the family members' parents is removed, incarcerated. I tried to get grandparents' rights for at least even visitation, and I didn't have an attorney, and I put in a petition. The judge never answered my petition. She handed it over to guardian ad litem. It was guardian ad litem, and the parenting the parenting plan, and that the guardian ad litem pretty much acted as the attorney for the parent that was left with the children, never once interviewed me, never once talked to me. And finally, after I called the judge's office several times, she wrote me a letter and said, you know, we have to support the parent's constitutional rights to parent. He's taking parenting classes. We find him to be a good parent. And, you know, I have to mend fences with the father to see the grandchildren. And, you know, it's gone further than that. It's been a whole year when she was removed to go to prison, and the grandsons have not been able to see the grandmother, or the grandfather. And we were very, very much part of their life. I helped raise them pretty much since they were in diapers. And then all of a sudden, the father wouldn't let us talk on the phone to them or see them, and it's been a whole year now that they have lost their mother to prison. She'll be in Minnesota for at least 3 or 4 years, and grandma and grandpa. And so I was wondering if anybody here afterwards could talk to me about any legal situation or experience they've had that could help me know what to do with the next step. You know, because it's like I can't even find out. Like at the school, I called school. Can I meet with the vice principal and see how the boys are doing? Oh no, we're not releasing any information about these children. I mean, for all I know, I would have to even say I wouldn't even know if they were still with the father. I wouldn't even know if they'd been in the hospital. You know, I didn't know anything about what was going on with them. So it's gone further of not even being able to see them, but not even be able to find out how they're doing. And I just think that something's wrong with the legal system, you know. And I just wondered if anybody can help me, because I can't afford an attorney.
Can she not petition a letter to the judge asking for a parenting plan that includes maybe not custody, but visitation?
I'll be happy to talk to you about
Okay,
it.
okay.
Well, I worked at the men's prison in Deer Lodge for several years, and one of the things that I felt was really critical and saw as a revolving door for men getting out, going back, getting out, going back, was that they did not have a support system that was set up, and did not know how to set up that support system. And I think that in of itself has to be a critical factor for anybody getting out. Because for some of these men, when getting out, if they've been in there for very long, it's learning new things. I mean, for some of them, technology itself is real, they don't know what to do with phones, and they have kids that are a whiz at it. And it's very, very frustrating. So any of those classes where they can have new coping skills, different coping skills, new social skills, different. And you have for a lot of these men, their partners have been taking care of their children while they're gone to prison for release, etc. When they get out, she's been doing this for a long time, and he wants to step back into the picture where he was when he left, and she says, So there are a lot of different things, it's frustrating for him because he wants his family back. A lot of men in prison did not want visitation because they did not want to see their children, to see them in that environment. So there are a lot of human factors here that enter in. Myself, I really feel like support for just the little things is critical. A lot of these men and women don't have transportation, so they're expected to get a job, go to parenting class, CPO, et cetera. And it's impossible. It's impossible. Most of them don't have driver's license anymore, or they've lost it because they're a felony DUI or whatever it is. They lost a driver's license. It's expensive to get it back. So there's a lot of support for just those basic everyday needs that is critical, as well as just the emotional needs. We try to do some of that within treatment, but not some of it. We rely on it. But the family has to come together as a unit. But first of difficult. You need to take care of those little things for one person.
I think sometimes that puts families in a difficult position because families, number one, they didn't do anything wrong, okay? But when that person comes home, there are going to be rules that that family has to live by that are more stringent than what they had to live with earlier. For instance, you know, they can't have any alcohol or drugs in the home. You know, even prescription medications maybe need to be secured depending on the person's crime or what happened. And that can be hard on families, but you know, the overwhelmingness of coming back into society after incarceration can be incredibly difficult. And what I try and do is acknowledge that it's difficult, but not impossible. People succeed all the time. And so, you know, acknowledging that it's difficult, but it's not impossible, and then helping them find the solution that works for them.
Well, I'm a counselor in private practice, and I'm an LAC and an LCSW, and the majority of the people that I seem to end up with are people that don't really have any meaningful family support. And, you know, watching people who are felons, who have no credit history, no rental history, try to find a place to live in this heartless town is just completely overwhelming. And I have one guy who, he has to register as a violent offender, and his violent crime happened in 2003, and it was a PFMA, and I mean, so, not saying that a PFMA is not a serious crime, but the actual events of the crime were not that serious, and so he finally just went back to jail. He was living at the pod, he was sleeping on the floor with 12 other people in a little tiny room, and you know, and it's so discouraging to watch people crash and burn like that, and people who really do want to succeed, and they just get so overwhelmed, they relapse and they go back to using. And I'm trying to compile a list of resources here in Missoula about housing, and for speaking on the point of view of a person on the ground, it's incredibly frustrating because they all seem to have some little rule, you know, that it's like a deal breaker. Like I just talked to somebody yesterday, she goes, oh, he has to have a year lease. Well, most of my people, for them, signing a year lease is like getting married. I mean, they're not ready to commit to a year-long block of time to do anything. And, you know, it's just there's always some little rule, or they have to have their kids with them today, and CPS has to write a letter saying that they're going to get their kids today, or we can't help them. And you know, I mean, so you're supposed to move into a brand new house and no furniture and get your kids today. I mean, it's like I just butted my head against this wall, and organization after organization, and I do want to compile a list. And as I said, none of these people will take violent offenders. You know, like I talked to every single person on the list, and so to me, it's that these people never get done paying for their crime. And you know, this kid is bright. He was going to SKC, and his whole life just fell apart. And you know, it's just so frustrating to see this happening, and I feel really hopeless. And you know, and then you call people like the Interfaith Collaborative, and they go, oh, we have a long waiting list. You'll have to put your name on it. And it's not that these people aren't helping people and good things aren't happening, but I'm kind of on the other end of the stick here, and I just feel really, really frustrated. I would appreciate anybody's input about making a better list, and what I wanted to do is just put it on an Excel spreadsheet so you could kind of help people and say, okay, here's some of the organizations that we might want to contact.
Well, I'm glad you asked, because on our website there is the threefold Missoula Reentry Resources. It's a start. It does not allow you to get housing by looking at it, believe me. But it has been something that people who have been successful at reentering, our leadership team, has put together. So it's an immediate resource. You can download it, and we're about, thanks to our new volunteer Liz Williams, to update it so that we keep it up. So there, you see, just ask and you shall receive here. But what you've just given is a good speech about why there's a Partners for Reintegration community coalition trying to work on the community's role in making that whole reentry process go better, because it's a daunting one, and we've had years of neglecting it as a community and saying, hey, it's not our job. I do want to introduce for the moment, so you can ask him. Jim Pagels is here from Department of Corrections, Montana State Prison. He's the reentry officer, and he's working on that side of the fence to make our work go better. And we hope, in turn, that we can start making his life go just a little bit better.
Thank you very much.
Okay, because it has not been very easy to do that. But the housing, I want to announce the SB 65, the housing bill, which has been passed, will be signed. Actually, what?
Can you explain the bill just a little bit
Yes,
more?
it has. For the first time ever, money, if we're lucky, you got to cross your fingers and toes. If the money stays in, it will have vouchers for the first time for the people getting out who do not have family, do not have a place to live, and might get Social Security supplemental income if they could get housing first, because you have to be out to get it. And so we're hoping that's going to start cleaning out the backlog of 120 people who was...
Well, it's going to be some time before we see the effect of that.
I understand. It's going to
You know,
be quite some time.
Yeah,
But
there's really no funding behind it, but it allows
funding,
agencies
yeah.
to go get funding.
Well, stay tuned, because Senator Wolken is always hopeful. And there is risk mitigation. There's no funding in SB 65. There is funding somewhere else. And there's a risk mitigation fund built into that bill that counties could set up, or the state could fund, or we could get a federal grant for, that it will help landlords overcome the felony record and kind of do exactly what your letter did, which is don't look at the felony record, look at this person as a good renter. So that bill's really important. The governor will sign it. And it's the first time we've seen a little ray of hope for reentry coming from our legislature. So we certainly should thank particularly Senator Wolken, who carried that for us, and also the fact that your partners for reintegration was there loud and kind of bossy last summer, saying you got to do something about housing. It's a reentry issue. So our time has ended. It is 1 o'clock. We want to be respectful of those of you who are working today. But our panel will stay here, and some of the audience, if you want to talk to them. And thank you again for coming.
Can I say one thing before you do that?
Sure can.
So April is Child Abuse Prevention Month, and tomorrow is the kickoff for it at noon on the lawn at the courthouse. Everyone is invited. Besides our usual pinwheel theme, we're also doing hashtags Great Childhood. So we're trying to do a positive slant on it. We really encourage people to come and talk about what you're doing to create great childhoods in Missoula. Thank you. Family friendly.